A very beautiful woman was furious when she was rejected by a single man, but when she found out the reason, she was shocked. Jessica was the kind of woman who made the world around her stop for a moment. With long black hair cascading over her shoulders and honey-colored eyes that hypnotized anyone who dared to look at her, she didn't need to make an effort to attract attention. From a young age, she was used to being the center of attention, and over time she learned to master this skill. When she walked through the city, it was as if the air around her changed, conversations hushed, and everyone wondered, who was that woman? And Jessica knew very well the effect she had. Her smile always carried a hint of self-sufficiency, of someone who already knew the answer. Her life seemed like one of those stories people dream of living. She grew up in a wealthy family, had access to the best schools, the best parties, and, of course, the best suitors. But none of that impressed her. For her, it was all part of what was expected. She didn't know the meaning of frustration or rejection. Everything always came to her feet, as if the universe conspired in her favor. Her mornings started with the softness of a cool breeze entering through the large windows of her luxurious apartment, with a view of the city skyline. Every detail of her life was carefully planned, from designer clothes to the social engagements she attended. Jessica loved gala nights, events that gathered high society, where everyone bowed to her presence. She arrived like a queen, always in a stunning dress, making her entrance as if she was made for that scene. In that world of luxury and excess, she expertly navigated the superficial conversations, where compliments flowed easily and fake smiles were exchanged like currency. But despite living surrounded by people, her life was in some ways lonely. Few truly knew her, and few dared to break through the barriers she had built with her impenetrable charm. Jessica's self-confidence, however, was a reflection of everything she had achieved effortlessly. In her interactions there was no hesitation, no doubt. Every gesture of hers was measured and elegant. She was the kind of woman who knew exactly what she wanted and, more importantly, knew how to get it. When she entered a room, all eyes were drawn to her as if she were magnetic. Women envied her and men desired her. And this certainty pushed her further, as if it were impossible for anything in her life to go wrong. Her days were filled with an impeccable routine. Breakfast served on the balcony of her apartment while she read the latest fashion and business trends. Then, meetings with designers, dinners with influential businessmen, and, of course, leisure moments reserved for trips to exotic places. But deep down, as perfect as her life seemed, there was a slight feeling of emptiness, a part of herself that she didn't want to admit that, despite all the attention, something was missing, and she never knew what it was. The men who approached her were always the same type, impressed by her looks, eager to win her over, but never really knowing her. Jessica saw it in their eyes, the easy adoration, the desire to please. But that wasn't enough. She longed for something deeper, something she couldn't even name. But who would dare not surrender to her? That was a question she never had to ask herself because everyone always did. When she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she saw perfection. There were no flaws in her appearance, no insecurity. Jessica knew how beautiful she was and knew the impact her beauty had. The world smiled at her, and she returned the smile with the same coldness. She believed that fate owed her everything she had and that life would always be this way, flawless, without surprises, without pain. After all, what reason would there be for anything to change? However, as the days went by, something inside her quietly began to question. A small doubt whispered in her subconscious. What if there was something beyond this perfect world she had so carefully built? Something her eyes had not yet seen, something her hands had not yet touched. But of course they were just fleeting thoughts which she quickly dismissed. After all, she already had everything she needed. Jessica continued on her path with the same confidence as always, certain that the future would continue to deliver exactly what she expected. What she didn't know yet was that life, no matter how perfect it seems, always has its own twists in store. And for someone used to control, the unexpected could be devastating. The ballroom was full of glamour and luxury. Jessica, in her red dress that seemed tailor-made for her impeccable curves, moved among the guests as if she were in her own kingdom. Champagne glasses clinked and eyes turned to her as always. But at that moment, her eyes found something different. A man standing by the window with a distant and mysterious expression. He seemed immune to the euphoria of the room around him, an enigma in the midst of chaos. Jessica decided she needed to meet him. She approached with the confidence of someone who had never been rejected. "Good evening," she said, her voice soft as she offered a charming smile. Liam turned to her, his deep blue eyes meeting hers with unexpected calm. "Good evening," he replied, without the slightest sign of the enchantment Jessica was used to seeing in men. He held a glass of wine, but his body was slightly leaning toward the window, as if he preferred to be anywhere else. Jessica frowned, intrigued. "You seem a bit out of place," she commented playfully, trying to pull him into the conversation. Liam gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Maybe I am. These events aren't really my thing." He shrugged and took a sip of his drink, keeping his gaze on the window for a long time. Jessica, who was always in control of every interaction, felt challenged. How could he be so cold, so indifferent? "I would say you're doing well so far," she insisted, determined to break through that invisible barrier. "But I haven't seen you at other events like this. Is this your first time?" Liam looked at her with slight curiosity, his eyes discreetly assessing her. "Something like that. I usually avoid these places, but sometimes it's unavoidable." His voice was low, but it carried a quiet confidence that stirred something in Jessica. She was used to men competing for her attention, but Liam seemed distant, almost unreachable. "Oh, so you're the type who prefers more discreet places?" Jessica asked, her tone now tinged with subtle provocation. She expected that to get a reaction, maybe a laugh, a more interested look. But Liam simply gave another small smile without commitment. "I prefer places where I don't have to pretend to be interested in conversations that make no sense to me," he replied, his gaze now focused directly on hers, as if he wanted to measure her reaction. Jessica laughed, a little surprised by his frankness. "And does this conversation make sense to you?" she asked, leaning slightly toward him, challenging. Liam looked away for a moment, as if considering the question. "I think I'm starting to understand," he said enigmatically. The answer made Jessica's heart race, but she didn't know if it was because she was finally making progress or because she was being led into territory she couldn't predict. She tried to deepen the conversation, asking about his life, his interests, anything that might open the door to a more personal dialogue. "So, what brings you here if you don't like parties like this?" Liam sighed, as if tired of such questions. "Business. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary," he said evasively, but his tone had a weight that Jessica couldn't ignore. Something about the word sacrifices echoed inside her, as if he was talking about something much bigger than just a social event. Liam glanced at the watch on his wrist, cutting the rhythm of the conversation. "Well, it was a pleasure talking to you, but I have to go." He stepped back, preparing to say goodbye, but Jessica couldn't resist asking, "You're leaving already? We've barely started talking." Her eyes, for the first time, revealed a shadow of frustration. She wasn't used to being dismissed so quickly. He maintained the same calm smile. "Yes, it's late. Take care, Jessica." Jessica stood still, watching as he left. Her mind was racing. Liam didn't seem the least bit interested in her, and that intrigued her deeply. He wasn't like the other men who immediately fell under her charm. There was something about him, a distance, a mystery, that made her want to know more, and at the same time, it stung her pride in a way she didn't know how to handle. Jessica remained standing for a few seconds, watching Liam walk away with the same calm with which he had conducted the entire conversation. It didn't make sense. He had been polite, yes, but distant, as if she was nothing more than just another person in the crowd. For the first time, someone had shown complete indifference to her presence, and it hit her like an unexpected blow. She felt a pang of frustration, something she wasn't used to feeling in situations like that. How could someone simply walk away? While the other guests continued their animated conversations, Jessica forced a smile and turned around, trying to hide the internal whirlwind. She grabbed another glass of champagne from a passing waiter and looked around as if evaluating the party. But her mind was racing. The idea that Liam hadn't let himself be captivated by her made no sense. He had spoken to her, yes, but with calculated coldness, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. It was as if he had decided that nothing in that encounter would make him change his mind. While exchanging trivial words with acquaintances, Jessica could barely pay attention to the conversations around her. She felt irritated but also deeply intrigued. In her life, she was used to being the center of attention, to having people gravitate toward her, especially men. What was different about Liam? Why had he been so resistant? The wounded pride began to grow inside her, along with an uncomfortable sense of helplessness. She approached a friend, trying to appear casual. "Did you see the man I was talking to?" "Liam, I think that's his name," she said, pretending a disinterest far from what she felt. Her friend shrugged. "Yeah, he showed up recently, but nobody knows much about him." "He seems to be the reserved type," she replied without much concern. Jessica nodded, but her mind was stuck on that last detail. Nobody knew much about him. The frustration burned in her chest like a spark that refused to go out. She replayed the conversation in her head, trying to figure out where she had gone wrong. Had she been too insistent? Was he just distracted? But the truth was obvious. He wasn't interested. And that bothered her deeply because for the first time she had been rejected. Not an aggressive or rude rejection, but a cold and controlled rejection, which made it all the more painful. Jessica tried to hide her emotional state, but the irritation was evident in her gestures. She approached a group of acquaintances, laughed at bland jokes, but the truth was that her thoughts were fixed on Liam. She knew she shouldn't care so much. After all, it was just a casual conversation at a random party. But something about that rejection shook her in a way she had never felt before. It was as if Liam had seen something beyond the facade she presented to the world and chosen to walk away. What audacity, thought Jessica as she took another sip of champagne. She looked around, noticing that he had already left the party. What was so special about Liam that made him act so indifferently? He seemed like a regular man with nothing exceptional except for his mysterious air. But there was something more, something she couldn't name, and that uncertainty was consuming her. Jessica, always so confident, now found herself questioning her own ability to captivate someone. She knew she couldn't let it go. The wounded pride, the curiosity, everything was mixing in a whirlwind of emotions. Liam wasn't like the others. He hadn't succumbed to her charm. And as much as she tried to convince herself that it didn't matter, the fact was that it mattered a lot. More than any other man she had ever met. And the more she tried to distance herself from those thoughts, the more deeply they enveloped her. The party continued, but for Jessica, everything seemed distant, as if the sounds and lights had dimmed. She needed answers. She needed to understand why Liam had been so different. The rejection that initially irritated her was now driving her in another direction. Something inside her had been awakened, something she couldn't ignore. Jessica couldn't get Liam out of her head. The morning after the event, as the sun streamed through the large windows of her apartment, she found herself replaying every detail of their brief conversation. What did he mean by sacrifices? And why did he seem so determined to keep his distance? That feeling of powerlessness, something completely new to her, began to transform into a kind of obsession. She needed to find out more. Not just out of pride, but because of the deep curiosity that now consumed her. Who was Liam really? In the days that followed, Jessica began to ask discreet questions. She had her contacts, influential friends, and knew almost everyone in the city's elite social scene. "Do you know Liam?" she asked casually over lunch or at a cocktail party. The responses were always the same. A reserved man who showed up occasionally but never got deeply involved with anyone. "He seems mysterious, doesn't he?" some would comment, but no one had concrete information. This only made Jessica's curiosity grow even more. She started to investigate with more determination. Slowly, but with the precision of someone who knows what they want. She called acquaintances, mentioned Liam in conversations without raising suspicion. The challenge excited her. At the same time her mind replayed his cold gestures. Her heart raced with the thrill of chasing a mystery. But there was a limit to what others knew. Liam was more reclusive than she had imagined. Almost as if he chose to remain hidden. However, Jessica was not one to give up easily. Her quest for answers led her to spend more time at social events that Liam was known to attend. It wasn't common for her to need to chase after someone, but the fact that he had resisted her so deliberately made everything even more intriguing. At one of these occasions, while chatting with an old friend, she heard something that made her stop. "Liam? Oh yes, I think he works on something abroad, seems to have returned recently. Secretive things, you know?" The comment was made casually, but it echoed in her mind. Secretive? Jessica concealed her interest but felt a rush of adrenaline through her body. What did that mean? Was he involved in something beyond what he appeared to be? Her search, which had previously been driven by wounded pride, had now become a personal investigation. She needed to know what lay behind that coldness, what he was hiding. The more she sought information, the less she found, and this made her even more determined. Jessica's nights were now dominated by thoughts of Liam. As she lay down, she imagined what he was doing, where he might be. She even dreamed of his eyes, which had looked at her so calculatedly. It was no longer just a matter of being rejected, it was the need to understand. A mystery that seemed to deepen with every attempt she made to get closer. And now, her heart and mind were torn between the desire to uncover him and the anger at his inaccessibility. Jessica knew she needed to act carefully. She couldn't show too much interest, nor seem desperate for answers. So she began frequenting places she knew he liked, with the intention of casually crossing paths with him again. The first attempts were frustrating. He always avoided her, politely but clearly. Still, she didn't give up. No matter how much he seemed to want distance, Jessica had the feeling that there was something more, something preventing him from opening up. Her days began to revolve around Liam. At the gym, in cafes, at social events, she was always on the lookout, waiting for another chance encounter, another moment to try to get closer. When she couldn't see him, she sought information through other means, asking questions here and there but always being careful not to appear insistent. But with every step she took, with every clue she obtained, the mystery only grew. And with the mystery her obsession grew too. Jessica spotted him again at an event a few days later, her heart racing at the opportunity for a second chance. Liam was standing near the bar as casual as ever, but his eyes constantly scanned the room. He seemed to observe everything around him without ever really focusing on anyone or anything specific. There was a subtle tension in his posture, as if he was always prepared for something unexpected. Even while chatting with other guests, his attention seemed to be elsewhere. Jessica approached, determined to start a conversation again, this time with more strategy. "I see you have a habit of appearing and disappearing from these parties," she said, smiling as she grabbed a glass of champagne. Liam looked up and gave a slight smile, but that smile didn't reach his eyes. "Only when necessary," he responded, maintaining an educated but distant tone. Jessica, however, felt that there was something behind that simple response. There was an invisible layer he was trying to protect. She tried to keep him engaged, talking about the event and people they both knew. But Liam always gave short, controlled answers. And what intrigued her even more was the way he politely steered the conversation back to her, without ever revealing anything about himself. Whenever Jessica tried to learn something personal, he deflected, with the elegance of someone who is used to dodging without appearing rude. "Have you always been so reserved?" Jessica asked, pretending to joke, but her words had a clear goal. Liam paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "I believe there is a certain value in not sharing too much," he replied, his eyes briefly meeting hers before looking around the room. Jessica felt a chill down her spine. He seemed to be protecting himself from something, but what? She now observed him more closely, noticing small details that hadn't caught her attention before. The way he always positioned himself near an exit, as if he were ready to leave at any moment. Or how his eyes scanned the room, never staying in one place for long. It was as if he was always on alert, and this only fueled Jessica's curiosity. What was going on with Liam? What was he hiding? She couldn't ignore the feeling that he was more than he appeared. When she tried to pull a little more on the thread, asking about his life before returning to the city, Liam simply dodged again, now with a firmer tone. "My past is something I prefer to leave where it is," he said, his gaze becoming briefly distant. Jessica sensed the discomfort in his response, as if he had erected a barrier between them. He then paused before looking at his watch and apologizing. "I have to go." "It was nice talking to you, Jessica." The abrupt farewell left Jessica with a bitter feeling. He left as suddenly as he had arrived, like a shadow disappearing into the crowd. Once again she was left behind, feeling bewildered and this time even more determined. With each new attempt to get to know him, Liam seemed to close off even more. As if he were protecting a secret he couldn't let slip, no matter how hard she tried to get closer. Jessica stood from afar, watching as he left through the door, feeling increasingly immersed in that mystery. Liam's behavior was not simply that of someone reserved. There was something deeper, something that kept him constantly on guard. She wondered, was he running from someone? Or from himself? Whatever it was clear that he didn't want to get involved, but that only made her more motivated to discover it. That night, when she returned home, Jessica realized that the curiosity she felt for Liam had evolved into something greater. It was no longer just about the mystery of rejection, but the sense that there was something dark, something hidden in his story that kept him so distrustful and evasive. The more he distanced himself, the more she felt drawn to him. Like a puzzle that refused to be solved, Liam now occupied all her thoughts. Jessica couldn't get Liam out of her head, and the more he withdrew, the more determined she became to find out who he really was. There was something about his behavior, something in the fleeting glances and the meticulous way he moved, that made her believe he was hiding much more than just a common past. It was almost as if he carried a dark secret, an invisible weight that kept him distant. And she, accustomed to solving her problems with charm and influence, decided she wouldn't rest until she uncovered everything. It was on a sunny afternoon, during a lunch with friends at a sophisticated restaurant, that Jessica began to get her first clues. A casual acquaintance, upon hearing Liam's name mentioned in passing, changed his expression. "Liam? The one who recently returned from a long time away? I've heard of him, but no one really knows what happened," he said, shaking his head as if dealing with a riddle. They say he spent years abroad, involved in complicated things. Jessica kept her expression neutral, but inside, her interest had ignited like a flame. Complicated things? She asked, trying to sound casual, but every word now was an invitation for the friend to elaborate. That's what they say, he replied, shrugging. You know how it is, business stuff. But it seems like he disappeared for a while. Not many people have the guts to ask what really happened. The information was like a shock. Disappeared? The mystery around Liam only seemed to deepen. Jessica knew it was time to go beyond casual conversations. She started searching with more insistence, but with discretion. She spoke with old acquaintances, frequented places where he had been, trying to piece together the fragments. What bothered her the most was the silence around his story. No one knew for sure what Liam had been doing during the years he was away. It was as if he had deliberately erased parts of his life. With each detail she uncovered, no matter how small, the puzzle became more intriguing. Jessica discovered that Liam had worked in some remote places, but no one knew exactly what he was doing. It was always a vague story of business abroad, but there was a clear pattern: danger. Everyone who knew Liam from before seemed to suggest that his return was shrouded in secrets and that he had reasons for being so discreet. Jessica, however, wanted more. It wasn't enough to know that he had been away. She needed to know why. What had driven him to isolate himself from everyone for so many years? And more importantly, why was he back now, acting like he was trying to blend in, but clearly keeping his distance from everyone? Each time she thought about it, she felt closer to a truth that no one else seemed to see. And the closer she got to that truth, the more her obsession grew. One night, while navigating her network of contacts, a childhood friend mentioned something that changed the course of her investigation. I remember that, before disappearing, Liam went through something terrible. I think it was right after he lost someone very close, the friend commented, almost absent-mindedly while flipping through a magazine. He was never the same after that. Jessica froze at this revelation. There was something deeper, a trauma, that seemed to have transformed Liam and made him disappear. But who had he lost? Now, more than ever, Jessica was determined. She knew she needed more answers, and that Liam, with his coldness and distance, wouldn't give them easily. He was avoiding something, perhaps protecting someone or himself from something bigger. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a frightening way, and Jessica felt she was on the verge of discovering something that could change everything. Her search for Liam was becoming more than just a game of curiosity. Now it was personal. She wanted to understand who he really was and what lay behind that mysterious behavior. She knew she was dealing with something dangerous, something that could change the way she saw the world. But Jessica could no longer turn back. She needed to go to the end to uncover everything. And deep down, she knew she wasn't just trying to understand Liam. She was also seeking something that could explain her own life. Jessica couldn't stand Liam's silence anymore. He always appeared and disappeared from parties like a shadow, and with every attempt to approach him, he withdrew, leaving her in the void. The wounded pride, mixed with the relentless curiosity, was consuming her. She knew he was hiding something important, and she could no longer passively wait for answers. One night, after yet another social event full of formalities and empty conversations, Jessica made a decision. She would confront him. She waited until the end of the party, when the room was almost empty, and spotted Liam discreetly leaving as he always did. With her heart racing, Jessica crossed the room toward him, determined. "Liam," she called, her voice firmer than she expected. He stopped, turned slowly, and looked at her with that calm, impenetrable gaze. But there was a tension in the air, as if he knew this moment was coming. "Can you explain to me what's going on?" Jessica was direct, no beating around the bush. She moved closer, ignoring the cautious way he observed her. "Why do you always avoid me? Why do you act like you're running from something or someone?" The words came out quickly, filled with the accumulated frustration of the past few weeks. Liam let out a heavy sigh, as if he were tired of her persistence, but he showed no surprise. It was as if he had been expecting this. "Jessica, you wouldn't understand," he said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't about you, it's about something bigger." She frowned, unable to accept such an evasive answer. "What do you mean, something bigger? What are you hiding?" she insisted, now unable to hold back the emotion in her voice. Liam looked away, but there was a hardness in his expression, as if he was holding back from saying more than he should. "I'm not avoiding you, Jessica," he began, his eyes now focused on the floor. "I'm protecting you." Those words fell like a stone in her chest. "Protecting me from what?" she shot back, trying to maintain control of the situation. He hesitated for a moment, as if he were weighing the impact of his next words. "From a danger you don't understand," he finally said, his voice laden with what seemed like regret, but he offered no further explanation. Jessica stood silent for a moment, processing what he had just said. Protect her? What kind of danger was he talking about? She felt a mix of frustration and relief. There was a reason he had kept his distance, but the mystery only deepened. "Liam, you need to be honest with me." Her voice came out softer, almost pleading now. "What's happening? Why can't you tell me the truth?" Liam looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness she had never seen before. "Some things can't be said, Jessica. It's for your safety, and mine." He took a step back, signaling that the conversation was nearing its end. "I can't involve you in this. It's dangerous." The word dangerous echoed in Jessica's mind. Her heart tightened, now more anxious than ever to understand what was truly at stake. But before she could say anything else, Liam began to walk away. "You'd better stay away from me," he said in a near desperate tone, turning and disappearing into the shadows of the night. Jessica stood there, stunned. The answers she had been seeking were right in front of her, but he continued to evade them, leaving only more questions behind. If he was really protecting her, it only increased her need to uncover the truth. A chill ran through her body as she watched Liam disappear into the darkness. Danger? Protection? His words echoed in her mind. Something terrible was coming, and the only certainty she had was that now she could no longer stop. What didn't Liam want her to know? From that moment on, Jessica knew she would follow her instincts, even if it led her to uncover deeper and more dangerous secrets than she ever imagined. Jessica felt increasingly entangled in the web of mystery surrounding Liam. The words danger and protection wouldn't leave her head. Her intuition told her that something much bigger was at play, something he didn't want her to know. Determined to find out what was being hidden, Jessica searched her past for any clue that could connect her to Liam. And so, on a cold night, while going through an old box of memories stored for years, she found the letters. These letters belonged to her late fiancé, someone she loved deeply and lost tragically. For years, Jessica had kept those memories carefully but had never allowed herself to read them again. The weight of the pain was unbearable. Yet, something pushed her to open them at that moment. As she unfolded the papers yellowed by time, she realized that the contents were more than just declarations of love. There was something more between the lines. In one of the letters, the name Liam appeared for the first time, like a whisper from the past. Her heart raced. Her fiancé mentioned a brother involved in a dangerous mission, someone he was very proud of but who lived under the shadow of secrets and challenges. Jessica read carefully, feeling her blood run cold. It could be a coincidence, but the connection between the name and Liam's evasive behavior was too strong to ignore. The letter spoke of sacrifices, of a mission that would separate the two brothers for an indefinite time. Jessica's hands trembled as she turned the page. Each word seemed like a piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was assembling. Her fiancé spoke with affection and admiration about the brother, mentioning that their lives had taken different paths due to difficult decisions that needed to be made. The tone of the letter changed toward the end, becoming darker. He mentioned the possibility that one day the brother would need to hide, change identities, and sever all ties. She paused for a moment, the silence of the night enveloping her thoughts. Liam? She whispered to herself as if the name now carried a new weight. Could this Liam really be the brother of the man she loved and lost? The idea seemed absurd, almost impossible, but the coincidence was too powerful to ignore. Her heart pounded erratically, and her body was overcome with a mix of excitement and fear. What did this mean? How had she never noticed this connection? Driven by this new revelation, Jessica continued reading the letters, looking for more details. And there it was, a mention of a secret military mission, something her fiancé had never openly discussed. What else had he hidden from her? The whole story was beginning to make sense but also raising more questions. Why had Liam never mentioned his brother? And why now did he seem so determined to keep her away? As the hours passed, Jessica's mind whirled, trying to organize the loose pieces of this story. The letters revealed a relationship of loyalty, sacrifice, and, above all, a need for protection that went beyond mere familial bonds. Liam wasn't just a mysterious man who crossed her path. He had a direct connection to the past she had tried so hard to leave behind. And now, the mystery wrapped him even more deeply into her life. Jessica closed the last letter and stared at the pile of papers in front of her, her hands still trembling. The brother her fiancé mentioned wasn't just a distant memory. He was there, right in front of her, hidden under an identity he was desperately trying to protect. But why? What was the real danger he feared? And more importantly, what was her role in all of this? Jessica knew she could no longer delay. The letters, the past, the truth she had feared, all pushed her toward an inevitable confrontation. The mystery surrounding Liam had deepened in a way she couldn't ignore, and now, with the proof in her hands, it was time to demand answers. That night, she found him in a more discreet place, far from the social events. There was an air of tension that seemed to tighten the air around them, as if both knew that this moment would change everything. She approached slowly, the letters carefully stored in her purse, but her heart heavy with uncertainties. When Liam saw her, his eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Jessica realized he knew what was coming. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. Liam hesitated but didn't avoid her as he usually did. "I know you're hiding something from me, Liam. Something big. And I want the truth." Liam tried to disguise it, looking away, but Jessica wasn't going to let him escape this time. She pulled the letters from her purse and held them out to him. "These letters, they're from my fiancé. Your brother." The words came out with unexpected force, as if finally releasing that truth was a form of liberation. Liam's face changed instantly. His normally calm and impassive expression broke for a moment of pure surprise. His eyes scanned the letters, recognizing them, and he knew he could no longer run. "How did you?" Liam began to speak but stopped, his voice trembling slightly. He looked at Jessica, clearly shaken. "I tried to protect you from all of this," he finally confessed, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I am his brother. And yes, those letters, everything you read is true." Jessica felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, even though she had already suspected. Hearing those words was different. The confirmation that the man she loved and the man who now avoided her were deeply connected in a way she could never have imagined. The pain and confusion on Jessica's face were clear, but she forced herself to continue. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep me in the dark all this time? I had the right to know." Her voice trembled now, a mix of anger and hurt. Liam sighed, running his hand through his hair, as if searching for a way to explain the inexplicable. "I couldn't. After he died, after the mission, everything changed. Taking on another identity was the only way to ensure that all of us would be safe." "Safe from what?" Jessica demanded, growing more frustrated with the vague answers. Liam looked at her for a long moment before responding. "I made enemies, Jessica. Many. And if they found out who I really am or that I had any connection to you, I couldn't let that happen." Jessica felt a wave of emotions engulf her. This man, who had always seemed distant and unattainable, was now standing before her, revealing a past he had tried to bury. "I was there, all along, but I never wanted to get involved, never wanted to bring you into this chaos," Liam continued, his voice now steadier but with a clear weight to it. "After he died, I promised myself I would do everything to protect his memory and, more importantly, to protect you." Jessica remained silent, absorbing the depth of the sacrifice he had made. Everything she had felt, the frustration, the rejection, the obsession, now made sense, but it also brought a new kind of pain, a pain of loss and sacrifice she wasn't prepared to face. Liam seemed more vulnerable than ever, his facade finally broken. "I never wanted you to know. I never wanted you to carry this burden. But now that you do, there's no going back." Jessica watched him, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. The revelations were overwhelming, and the past she thought she had left behind had come back with relentless force. The brother of the man she loved, the man now standing before her, had made sacrifices she could never have imagined. And now everything was out in the open. Liam took a step back as if he already knew what the end of this story would be. "Now you understand why I never got close. Why I always kept my distance. I couldn't bring you into this. Never." Jessica took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth settle on her shoulders. Liam looked away, the weight of his words sinking in before he even said them. Jessica waited for an answer, her breath suspended in the air between them. "I didn't stay away from you because I wanted to, Jessica," he began, his voice deeper than usual. "I've been watched. Always have been. Since I returned to the country, I haven't had a moment of peace." Jessica frowned, surprised by the confession, but she let him continue. "If I got close to you, they would notice. And you'd become a target?" She felt a chill run down her spine. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice now filled with a tension she tried to control. Liam sighed, looking around as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "Old enemies, people who still hunt me because of decisions I made during that mission. I did things I can't escape. And if they found out I had any connection to you, Jessica, I couldn't protect you." Jessica was stunned. The reason for all of Liam's distance, The coldness that had irritated her so much now made terrible sense. "So, you've been protecting me all this time? That's why you rejected me, pushed me away?" Her voice held a tone of disbelief, but deep down she already knew the answer. Liam nodded, his expression heavy with guilt. "I tried. But I didn't know how to keep you away without hurting you. Everything I did was out of fear that you'd get caught up in this dangerous game." Jessica felt torn. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand that he had told her the truth from the start. But another part understood the sacrifice Liam had made, how difficult it must have been to carry the burden of protecting someone without them knowing. "You didn't have the right to decide that for me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I could have helped. I could have understood." Liam lowered his head, the pain evident in his eyes. "I didn't want to give you that choice." The truth was there, raw between them. Liam had stayed away not out of disinterest, but out of fear of putting her in danger. Jessica began to understand the weight he had carried, the constant sense of being hunted, and why he chose to isolate himself. "You think that by being close to me it would be enough for them too?" she began, but Liam interrupted her. "Yes, they're always watching. I couldn't risk it. The past still haunts me, Jessica. And they would make you a target just to get to me?" The revelation hit hard. The life Jessica had rebuilt after losing her fiancé was more connected to the past than she could have imagined. And now, Liam was admitting that everything he had done, every time he pushed her away, was to protect her. She felt a mix of anger, sadness, and understanding. "So, you chose to carry this burden alone," she said, more of a statement than a question. Liam nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his confession. "I made a promise to my brother, Jessica," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promised I'd protect you, that I'd make sure you'd never have to deal with what happened on that mission. But no matter how hard I tried, the connection between us was always stronger than the fear I carried." Jessica looked at him, finally understanding the sacrifice Liam had made for her, and also for his brother. Everything he did was out of loyalty, out of love, even if it meant living in the shadows. The silence that followed was heavy but filled with a new understanding. Jessica felt suffocated by what she had learned, but there was also a certain relief. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore, Liam," she said softly. Her eyes met his, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Jessica stood there in front of Liam, feeling a wave of emotion she could barely process. What had once felt like cold rejection now revealed itself as an act of profound sacrifice and love. Not just for her but also for the brother they had both lost. It was as if the void her fiancé had left was being filled in an unexpected way, through Liam, through the connection that had always existed but had been hidden by the shadows of fear and protection. "I never imagined all of this was for me," Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. Her eyes shimmered, but not with anger or frustration. There was a new understanding, an acknowledgement of what Liam had endured in silence. "You did all of this to protect us, to honor what he meant?" Liam nodded slowly, the sadness in his gaze saying more than words ever could. "I did what I thought was right. But it was never easy." There was a long silence between them, a silence heavy with meaning. Jessica felt the pain of losing the man she loved, but also the pain of Liam, who had lost not only a brother but the chance to live a normal life. They were bound by suffering, by loyalty, and now, by a truth that connected them in ways neither of them could have predicted. "He always spoke about you in his letters," Jessica whispered. "About how much he admired your strength, and how much he loved you." Liam looked at her, his eyes filling with tears he fought to hold back. "He was my brother. I would have done anything for him." His voice faltered, but he continued. "And when he was gone, I knew I had to take care of you. He asked me that in his final moments. I promised I'd keep you away from all the chaos." Liam's words were like a knife that cut deep, but at the same time they brought comfort. Everything made sense now. Jessica felt the tears welling up in her eyes. They were both trapped in that cycle of loss and protection, and they finally understood that the bond they had with the man they lost was what had always kept them connected. She took a step forward, gently touching Liam's hand. "I miss him every day," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "But now I know I wasn't alone. You were always there, in a way I never realized." Memories flooded them both, memories of the man they shared in such different ways. For Jessica, he was the love of her life, the man who made her believe in the future. For Liam, he was the brother who guided him and inspired him to be more than he ever thought he could be. Tears streamed down both their faces, not just for what they had lost, but for what they had finally found in each other. A deep understanding, a profound respect for the sacrifice that bound them. "He would have been proud of you, Liam," Jessica said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Everything you did was out of love for him and for me. Liam lowered his head, finally allowing the tears to fall. I didn't want it to be this way. I wanted him to still be here, to see that I kept my promise. Jessica squeezed his hand, feeling the pain they shared, but also the strength that emerged from that moment. They remained silent for a while, allowing the emotions to envelop them. The past, which had once separated them, now served as a bridge between them. Every tear that fell carried the weight of years of suffering but also of redemption. He brought us together even after everything, Jessica said, trying to find some solace amid the pain. In a way neither of us could have imagined. Liam nodded, his eyes still filled with sadness but with a glimmer of acceptance. I'll never stop missing him, he said, his voice finally steady. But I know he wanted us to be at peace, and for you to be safe. Jessica, her heart heavy, realized that the bond between them was now unbreakable, forged by love and the pain of a shared past. Liam took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment press down on his shoulders. He knew what he needed to do, even though the thought tore him apart. As much as the connection with Jessica was intense, filled with meaning and shared memories, the danger still loomed over them like a shadow. He needed to walk away to ensure she remained safe. I can't stay, he said, his voice low and somber. I can't put you at risk. As much as I want to be by your side, I can't. It's not safe. Jessica, who was still trying to process everything they had just shared, felt the impact of those words like a punch to the gut. Liam, it doesn't have to be this way, she began, but her voice failed halfway through the sentence. She knew he was right. Even after everything, even after understanding the sacrifice he had made for her, the danger was still present, and keeping her away was the most painful yet safest way to protect her. The tears began to well up in her eyes. If I stay, they'll find out. They always do, Liam continued, the pain in his voice more evident now. And I won't allow anything to happen to you. I couldn't bear it. Jessica fought against the tears, trying to accept the harsh reality he was presenting to her. She knew that the love and connection between them were strong, but she also knew that Liam's life was entangled in dangers she could barely understand. She wiped her eyes, trying to find the strength to say what needed to be said. I understand, Liam. I understand that sometimes love means letting go. Her voice was soft, filled with emotion. Jessica, more than anyone, knew what it meant to lose someone you love. And now, even though she wanted to fight against it, she knew it was the right choice no matter how painful it was. Thank you for giving me the letters. For letting me see the truth even though it now means losing you again. Liam looked at her, the anguish in his eyes clear. He wished he could stay, wished things were different, but he knew the future they dreamed of was beyond their reach. Those letters were my gift to you, but also to me, he confessed, his voice almost a whisper. They kept me connected to him, to us. I wanted you to know that I never truly stayed away, not from him, not from you. The tears Jessica had been trying so hard to hold back now flowed freely down her face. She couldn't deny the bond between them, but she also knew that keeping him close would mean living under constant fear. And as much as it hurt, she had to accept that. I'll never forget what you did, Liam, she said, her voice trembling. You honored the promise you made to your brother, and I'll never stop being grateful for that. The silence that fell between them was heavy, full of unspoken words that both of them understood perfectly. Liam looked at her, feeling his heart break as he saw the pain in her eyes. I did what I had to do, he said, the pain ripping through his words. And I would do it all over again. But now, I need to go for real. Jessica nodded, accepting what he was saying, even though every part of her wanted to scream otherwise. I know, she whispered, the tears still streaming down her face. I know. The moment was devastating, but also filled with a kind of understanding that few people could ever reach. They knew the love they shared, the bond that united them, was undeniable, but they also knew that the greatest sacrifice was letting him go. She looked at Liam one last time, trying to memorize every detail, every expression. Thank you, Liam, she said, her voice fragile but filled with gratitude. For everything. The silence between Jessica and Liam seemed to last an eternity. Every word had been spoken, every truth revealed, and all that was left now was the inevitable goodbye. Jessica looked at him, seeing the weight of sacrifice in his eyes, and knew this would be the last moment they would be so close. The feeling of loss was devastating, but at the same time, there was a calm she hadn't expected to feel. It was as if, finally, both of them had been freed from the ghost that had haunted them for so long. Liam took a step toward her, hesitant at first, but then allowing himself to come closer completely. Jessica, without thinking, pulled him into a tight, deep embrace. Feeling his warmth, The physical presence of someone who had been so distant for so long was comforting and painful at the same time. They stayed there, hugging without saying a word, feeling the rhythm of their hearts beating in sync. They knew that this embrace wasn't just a goodbye, but also an acceptance of the past and everything they had lived through. Jessica's tears fell silently as she closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the strength of that moment. Liam held her gently as if wanting to hold on to that feeling forever. And for an instant, they allowed themselves to forget the danger, the pain, and the circumstances that had kept them apart. It was just the now, and in that moment they were at peace. Liam murmured softly, almost inaudibly, "I never wanted it to be like this." Jessica only tightened the embrace as if to say she understood, that it was okay. When they finally pulled apart, Liam kept his hands on her shoulders for a few seconds, as if he wanted to prolong the moment. His eyes were filled with emotion, but there was a determination Jessica couldn't ignore. He was ready to go, and she knew she could no longer stop him. With one last sigh, Liam reached into the inner pocket of his coat and carefully pulled out a small package. He looked at Jessica, hesitating for a second, then handed it to her. "These are the last letters," he said, his voice rough. "I've kept them for a long time, but I think now they belong to you." Jessica looked at the package in her hands, her heart tight. Her late fiancé's letters, the final link she didn't know still existed. Liam had kept those memories hidden, perhaps as a way of protecting them both, and now he was giving her what was left of the past. She looked up at him, speechless but full of gratitude. "Thank you, Liam," was all she could manage, her voice breaking. She knew what those letters meant. They weren't just words written on paper. They were fragments of a life she had shared and of a promise Liam had kept until the end. He gave a small, sad but sincere smile, knowing that those letters were more than just a goodbye. They were a new beginning for both of them. A closure, a way to finally let the past rest. Jessica held the package to her chest, feeling the symbolic weight of that gift. As she did, a sense of peace washed over her. It was strange to feel relief in the midst of pain, but she knew there was something transformative in that moment. They were saying goodbye not just to each other, but to the shadows that had haunted them. It was a farewell, yes, but also a release. Liam took a deep breath, looking at Jessica one last time. He knew that leaving was the best thing he could do, but the bond between them, built on loss, sacrifice, and love for his brother, would never be broken. Jessica, for her part, felt the same. Although it was a moment of farewell, she knew that the connection they shared would always be there, even if they followed different paths. Without saying anything else, they stared at each other for a long second, both aware that they were leaving behind something greater than any words could express. Jessica held the letters firmly to her chest, feeling the emotional weight of what had just happened. She watched as Liam took a few steps back, his figure gradually blending into the shadows of the night. There was no need for words in that moment. The silence they shared said everything. They both knew they were walking down different paths from here on out, but for the first time, there was peace between them. The ghost that had haunted them for so long had finally been set free. Liam looked at her one last time. His gaze carried a mix of sadness and gratitude, but also a firm resolution. He was leaving to continue his mission, knowing that danger still lurked, but now with the certainty that Jessica was safe, that he had fulfilled the promise he made to his brother. Jessica, for her part, felt lighter, as if she had finally received the answer she had been searching for all along. There was no more mystery, no more burden of doubt. She smiled at him, a soft smile full of understanding, letting him know that she accepted what had to be done. Their past, marked by pain and distance, was now resolved. Jessica knew she would never forget him, just as she knew that this chapter of her life was closing here, definitively. They were no longer prisoners of what had happened. Each of them now carried their part of the burden, but with a new perspective. Liam nodded silently, as if thanking her for that smile, for that silent acceptance. Then he turned and began to walk. His steps were firm, but there was a lightness that hadn't been there before. He walked toward the unknown, to continue his life under the shadow of the responsibilities he had taken on, but now with a heart a little more at peace. His duty to his brother and to Jessica had been fulfilled. Jessica stood still for a moment, watching until he disappeared completely from sight. When he was gone, a solitary tear ran down her face, but it was a different kind of tear. It was no longer one of pain or loss, but of acceptance. She opened the small pile of letters again and looked at them. The words of her fiancé, the memories Liam had kept for so long, were now in her hands, and that gave her a sense of closure. Everything made sense now. Taking a deep breath, Jessica began to walk in the opposite direction. The streets were quiet, the night cold, but inside her there was warmth. The weight she had carried for so long seemed to have finally lifted. The mystery of Liam, the pain of losing her fiancé, it all now had a clear purpose. She no longer needed to fight the past or try to uncover hidden secrets. Fate had revealed what she needed to know, and now she could move forward. As she walked, a slight smile formed on her lips. The letters, which once seemed like a bond to pain, were now a gift. A reminder that even amid chaos there was love, sacrifice, and the strength of unbreakable bonds. Jessica knew that those final moments with Liam were a definitive goodbye, but also a new beginning. There were no more unanswered questions, just the certainty that she had found the peace she had been seeking. She looked up at the night sky, taking a deep breath. The air felt lighter, fresher. Jessica knew that, despite everything, she would move forward with a new understanding of what truly mattered: love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Liam would follow his own journey, and she hers, but both, in some way, were connected by something greater than any obstacle they had faced. With a peaceful heart, she held the letters against her chest once more and continued walking. This time, with the certainty that, no matter how lonely the road, she was finally at peace with the past and ready for the future. If you enjoyed Jessica and Liam's incredible story, subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any of the next videos. If you love emotional chronicles and wish to support our channel to continue bringing more quality content, consider contributing via Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the first pinned comment. Your help is essential for us to continue improving. Thank you for your support. See you in the next emotional chronicle.